Alabama scored 98 points on 42% shooting from three, and they lost.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host for today's show, Andy Patton, and you are joining at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. We got shows Monday through Friday. We now got live shows Saturday night every single week. At the end of the college basketball slate on Saturdays, our good friend Leaf Tulane hosts those shows, Locked On College Basketball Game Night. Check them out if you haven't yet. Fantastic way to end the best day of the college basketball season. I want to remind you all that you can get this show ad-free on Amazon Music, and give a special shout out to the everydayers and those members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Well, folks, Missouri took down Alabama. Auburn nearly got John Calipari at home, and Mark Pope and Kentucky rolled over Vanderbilt. We're going to break down all those matchups, some other bubbly games that took place on Wednesday, and we'll get you a preview of all of the fun action here on Thursday. But first, we start with a trio of SEC games. Three of the four games that involved ranked teams were in the SEC on Wednesday. The other one, St. John's rolling over DePaul. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that game, but we'll talk with the SEC matchups, starting with the one featuring two ranked teams. Missouri at home takes down Alabama. This is the 15th ranked Missouri Tigers hosting the number 4th ranked Crimson Tide of Alabama. And here's the crazy thing about this game, folks. Missouri got out to a 12-0 start. From that point forward, both teams scored exactly 98 points. But because Mizzou had that 12-0 run, they ultimately win this game. 110-98 was the final score. Just an absolute showing of offensive performances from these two teams. Really, it was a lot of Missouri at the free throw line and Mark Sears and other Alabama players knocking down a bunch of threes. That was really the story of this game. Mark Mitchell, career high for him for Missouri, 31 points. He was 11 of 15 from the field. He was 8 of 12 from the charity stripe. Arguably the most important or most impressive performance in this game, but Caleb Grill came off the bench for Mizzou and had a triple-double, 25 points, 11 assists, and 10 rebounds off the bench for Missouri. The Tigers, 31 of 47 from the free throw line, nearly 50 free throw attempts as Alabama really struggled defensively, gave up way too many cheap fouls, put Mizzou on the line throughout this game. Obviously, some of it coming down the stretch in this one, but still just a pretty ugly game with a lot. I mean, again, Bama shooting a lot of threes, Mizzou getting to the free throw line way too easily. A fantastic win for Mizzou. Not exactly a devastating loss for Alabama, but certainly not a good loss for Alabama either. For Mizzou, they get their 20th win. Dennis Gates has now won 20 or more games in 2 of his first 3 seasons. We'll ignore that the middle season, he didn't win a single game in the SEC. It's been very much a roller coaster in the first 3 years for Coach Gates at Mizzou, but they're 20-6 overall. They're 9-4 now in the SEC. Realistically, this could be a top 10 team in the AP poll next Monday. They got Arkansas this weekend, a road game in Fayetteville. That's not by any stretch an easy game for Dennis Gates and Mizzou. And if they don't win that game, I don't think they'll climb into the top 10. But if they do beat Arkansas after beating Alabama, I think this will be a top 10 team in the AP poll. And that's an incredible accomplishment for Mizzou coming off of a winless season in the SEC last year. Mizzou closes out not only at Arkansas, but then they got South Carolina at home. They're at Vanderbilt. They're at Oklahoma. Then they host Kentucky. All things considered, that's not the worst 5-game stretch in the SEC. South Carolina's not great. Arkansas's mediocre. Oklahoma's reeling right now. Vanderbilt at Vandy's a tough game. Kentucky at home is a tough game, but that's a stretch where Mizzou could conceivably go 4-1. At least should go 3-2 in that stretch. And this Mizzou team, I mean, they're very comfortably in the field at this point, but they're going to be a trendy team to pick come March. This has been a fun team to watch. Meanwhile, for Bama, second straight loss, 10-3 now in the SEC, 21-5 overall. Mark Sears, phenomenal performance, 35 points for the fifth-year senior, 12 of 20 from the field, 5 of 11 from deep. Bama, 13 of 31 just under 42% from three. They did have 14 turnovers and, again, 31 personal fouls for the Crimson Tide. Just too many opportunities for Mizzou to get the points at the free throw line. Even though they missed 16 free throws in this game, they did more than enough to get the W here. For Bama, this may cost them the 1 seed. At least it puts them on the edge of that conversation right now, with potentially Houston moving into that conversation. Maybe Tennessee moves into that conversation. We'll see. But for Bama, I'm not too worried about them at this point. They do have a relatively tough stretch. Again, it's the SEC. They're all tough. They got Kentucky at home. They got Mississippi State at home. They go at Tennessee. That's a big one. And then they host Florida. And then they're at Auburn. Murderous final for this Alabama team. You go 2 out of 3 in those final 3 games, you're probably back on the 1 line. You go 1 and 2, then it's a little bit closer. It depends on if Florida was one of your losses or one of your wins. And same with Tennessee, frankly. Those 3 teams right there are kind of vying for what I imagine will only end up being 2. Well, it will only be 2 because Auburn and Duke have them pretty much locked up. So it'll be interesting to see how those games go for this Alabama team. Speaking of Auburn, they escaped with a win at home against John Calipari in Arkansas. 67-60 was the final score, and Auburn pretty much led throughout, but Arkansas had a lead with about 6 minutes to go in the first half. They didn't lead again until the 3-minute mark in the second half with Nellie Davis hit a lay-in, gave them a lead at the time. I think it was 68-67 or 58-57 was the lead they picked up at that point. Auburn managed to hold off Arkansas. The Hogs just unable to make the shots they needed to make down the stretch. Neither team shot it well. These teams combined 7 of 43 from beyond the arc. It was an ugly, ugly shooting night for both teams. Arkansas managed to hang around. Nice game from John L. Davis, but at the end of the day, when they needed to hit shots, they couldn't hit shots. Zvonimir Ivicic, 0 of 10 from the field in this game, 0 of 9 from 3. He took 9 3-pointers, did not make a single one of them, 0 points, 8 boards, 3 blocks for him, but he took a couple of those shots down the stretch in key moments for Arkansas and just was not able to get him to go down. Janai Broome, 16 and 13 with 3 assists, kind of a slow game for him, but did enough to help get this team a W. They're 24 and 2 now, 12 and 1. In conference play, host Georgia, host Ole Miss, at Kentucky, at A&M, and then host Bama for their final 5. We'll see if Auburn can get into the SEC tournament with just 1 loss in conference play. Meanwhile, Arkansas, second loss in a row, have now lost 3 of their last 4, fall to 4 and 9 in the SEC, just 15 and 11 overall. The end result in this game, from like a metrics perspective, is not going to hurt Arkansas all that much. A close loss on the road to the number 1 team in the country. And if anything, there's a chance by the time you're listening to this, they may have gone up in the net. I wouldn't be surprised if they're up in the net, if they're up at KenPom. But this win would have been huge for them. Huge for them. It probably would have put them on the right side of the bubble pretty much permanently, unless they just really don't do well in the rest of their games. But not picking up this win means that they have to get another big win. They have to. They get opportunities. They got Mizzou next, Texas after that, at South Carolina, at Vandy, host Mississippi State. None of those teams on the same caliber as Auburn, of course, or even Alabama or Florida or Tennessee or any of those teams. But you do what you need to do. You beat Mizzou, who, again, is right now 15th, could be top 10 if they win that game. You beat Mizzou, you beat Texas at home, you win one of the next 3. You're probably in an okay spot if you're Arkansas. But the what they would have done by winning this game in terms of helping their chances of making the big dance, it's just frustrating for them to have come so close and not quite gotten it done. Other 2 ranked teams in action on Wednesday night. Kentucky cruised past Vanderbilt. Final score 82-61. Kentucky was only up 1 at halftime, but outscored the Commodores by 20 in the second half. Otega Owe, 20 points for him, 7 boards, 3 assists. He was 7 of 10 from the field. Kentucky shot 41% from 3, was perfect from the free throw line, 13 of 13. Meanwhile, Vandy just 5 of 25 from 3, barely 40% overall. If you're going to let Kentucky shoot 40% from 3, and you're not going to be able to knock down your shots, you're going to have a really hard time beating this Wildcats team. They're now up to 7-6 in the SEC ahead of their big matchup against Alabama. 3rd straight loss for Vandy, 5 of their last 6, unfortunately, for Mark Byington and the Commodores. They're now 5-8 in the SEC. They got Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, and then host Mizzou in their next 3. For this team to be back in that bubble conversation, you probably need at least 2 of those. And if you don't lose, if you go 1 and 2, or if you go 0 and 3, I think you can probably kiss that bubble spot goodbye. And then, like we said, St. John's cruised past DePaul. 82-58 was the final here. Kadari Richmond, 17 points, 9 boards, 5 assists on 8 of 14 shooting. 13-9 for Zuby Ejiofor with 3 assists and 2 blocks. Red Storm, what a season for Rick Pitino. 23-4 for the Johnnies. They are 14-2 in the Big East. We're not surprised they beat DePaul, but they haven't had any of those real bad slip-ups yet for this team, and they're looking real comfortable heading into the last part of February. But folks, bubble teams fared pretty well on Wednesday for the most part. If you were a bubble team rooting for those teams to lose, it wasn't a great day for you, although it certainly wasn't a great day to be a Cornhusker either. We're going to get to that in just a second. Attention college basketball fans, the future of college sports is here and it is transparent. Before the Roy App, NIL negotiations often happened under the table, and fans, they just didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes that they love. Now with Roy, you can be a part of the change and support your favorite college basketball players in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes that you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing your favorite college basketball players the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball podcast. We're still talking Wednesday night results around college basketball. We talked about the 4 games featuring ranked teams that happened on Wednesday night. Now we're going to talk about some bubbly action, some games that have an impact on the NCAA tournament bubble, as we are less than 1 month away from Selection Sunday and figuring out the actual bracket for the NCAA tournament. So we're going to talk about, I think, 6-7 games here that took place on Wednesday, for the most part, won by the teams that are on the bubble. So if you're like an Indiana fan or another team that's maybe in the bubble conversation, Xavier, I know, has been in the bubble mix. It wasn't a great day. You would like to see a few more of these teams lose. One of the teams that did lose that was on the bubble was Nebraska. They got waxed by Penn State, 89-72, which somehow almost feels like it doesn't do the actual margin of victory justice. This was a 50-27 game at halftime. Penn State just absolutely demolished Fred Hoiberg and Nebraska ball here in this one. The Penn State shot the Nittany Lions over 60% from the field in this game. It's the first win for Penn State since January 24th. They lost 7 straight, and then they go out and absolutely wallop a Nebraska team that was sitting firmly on the bubble. Nebraska now drops to 7-9 in the Big Ten, a bad bubble loss for them. Next up for them to close out the Big Ten season, they got Michigan at home, they got Minnesota at home, they go on the road at Ohio State, and then they got Iowa. You don't need to be 500 to get on the bubble, but I think you'd feel a lot better for Nebraska if you're at 500, so you need to win 3 of these 4. That's a pretty tough ask. Minnesota and Iowa at home are winnable games. At Ohio State, probably winnable, but tough. Michigan at home is going to be very difficult. So this Nebraska team did not do themselves any favors by losing here to Penn State. A couple of ACC teams on the bubble did exactly what they needed to do on Wednesday night, both by the exact same score. SMU obliterates Notre Dame. North Carolina destroys NC State. Both teams won 97-73. Both teams were up big at halftime. SMU was up 50-25. They out-rebounded Notre Dame by 23 in this game. The Mustangs now 11-4 in conference play, 20-6 overall. What a very successful year overall for SMU with their move to the ACC. Very good in football, now very good in basketball. Already a 20-win season for Coach Andy Enfield. Very comfortably above 500. Yes, the ACC is down for basketball, but that doesn't make SMU being this good in conference play any less impressive. They seem like they're comfortably on the right side of the bubble. A win over Notre Dame doesn't help as much as a loss would have been very devastating, but they still, from a metrics perspective, a blowout win is always helpful. And for this team, they actually still have enough. They have one good game left. Clemson at home is their next game. If SMU beats Clemson, that probably solidifies their spot in the NCAA tournament, assuming they don't stumble in their next 4 games, which are at Cal, at Stanford, Syracuse at home, and then at Florida State. You probably need to go 4-0 in those last 4. If you beat Clemson and go 5-0, you're in. If you go 4-1, probably should still be in, but that would depend on how some of those other teams do around you. For North Carolina, 9-6 now in ACC play. If you listened to the episode Leaf and I did on Wednesday, we talked about the previewing the night's games, and I said, well, North Carolina's 9.5-point favorites. They never win games by 9 or more points. Obviously, I jinxed them, or if you're a North Carolina fan, you're welcome, clearly, because they just rolled past this Wolf. And this NC State team is bad. It is kind of shocking. They've now lost 10 of their last 11 games. Their only win in that stretch was against Boston College. They're 3-12 in the ACC, one of the most disappointing teams coming off a Final Four season in the history of college basketball. At this point, they may not even go to the ACC tournament. You got to get into the ACC tournament to go on a 5-game winning streak and make the big dance like they did last year. They're competing with Notre Dame, who just got waxed as well, to even make the ACC tournament. Still, for North Carolina, comfortable win, out-rebounded NC State by 19, which is not something we say about the Tar Heels very often. Now they got 5 games left: Virginia at home, at Florida State, Miami at home, at Virginia Tech, and then Duke. You need those first 4. You need the first 4. None of them should be a challenge for North Carolina, but we've said that before. They took Boston College to overtime. You win these next 4, you can probably still get in even if you lose to Duke. Be real helpful if you beat Duke for your own self, for your sanity as North Carolina fans, and just for the comfort of not being as sweaty on Selection Sunday. But if you win these next 4, I think you feel, and then you probably should at least win 1 in the ACC tournament. Don't lose the first game. But if you win these next 4, I think you feel pretty good if you're North Carolina. Other bubbly things we saw on Wednesday: West Virginia escapes against Cincinnati. This one was crazy, folks. It's like a minute and a half left, or with 9 seconds left, all the way down to 9 seconds. West Virginia was up 9. They had a 9-point lead with 9 seconds remaining. The clock was just going to run out. The Gonzaga game was going to start on time as the next game up. Everything was golden. And then Dan Skillings hits a 3-pointer. West Virginia tries to quickly inbound the ball, throws it away. Who else but Dan Skillings gets the ball, drills another 3-pointer. In 5 seconds, Dan Skillings scored 6 points. And all of a sudden, this was a 62-59 game. And then, of course, there was multiple reviews and all sorts of chaos happened, and the game took forever, and no more points were scored. And West Virginia ultimately ended up winning by 3, 62-59, gets the W that they needed. Still crazy to see Cincinnati nearly pull off what would have been a stunning upset in this one. But the Mountaineers moved to 16-10 overall. They're now 7-8 in the Big 12. This keeps them on the bubble. Cincy is a good team. They're not playing all that well. They've played poorly in Big 12 play, so this would have looked bad for West Virginia to lose this game, but getting the W here helps them. Again, they should be on the right side of the bubble right now. Tough schedule for them. They are at Texas Tech in their next game. Then they host TCU. Then they got a pair of road games at BYU and at Utah. That is a long trip from Morgantown, West Virginia. We have seen traditional powerhouse Big 12 schools, cough, Kansas, cough, struggle in the road trips to Provo and to Salt Lake City to play these 2 teams in the mountains. So it's not something, it's, again, BYU and Utah both been playing good basketball as of late, but even regardless of that, this is going to be a tough road trip for the team in Morgantown regardless. Then they finish hosting Central Florida. You gotta do well here. You can afford to lose to Texas Tech. You can maybe afford to lose one of the road games in Utah, but you got to beat TCU at home. You got to beat Central Florida at home. And if you lose any of those other games besides Tech, you're going to be pretty sweaty on Selection Sunday. I think you got to go 3-2, 2-3. That's going to put you in a pretty precarious position. So be something to keep an eye on with Darian DeVries' team. Cincy fall to 15-11 overall. They're now 5-10 in the Big 12. They need a strong finish. I know they're non-conference. They did well, but they didn't play anybody super good. They had a few decent wins, but 5-10 in the Big 12. I mean, you got to get that much closer to 500. They got 5 games left. I think they got to go 4-1. I think they got to go 4-1 in their final 5 games. TCU at home, Baylor at home, at Houston, Kansas State at home, at Oklahoma State. All of those are potentially losable. At Oklahoma State, you should win. At Houston, very tough. So even if you lose that game, though, I think you got to beat Baylor at home. You definitely got to beat Kansas State and TCU at home, or else Wes Miller and Cincy is going to be on the wrong side of the bubble come Selection Sunday. A couple more games we'll just talk about quickly here. I don't think Gonzaga was truly on the bubble, but they might have been if they'd lost at Washington State. The Zags did not do that. They won by 21 points. Nolan Hickman, 23 points and 5 assists for him. Zags finished the regular season with 3 quad 1 opportunities: St. Mary's, at Santa Clara, and at San Francisco. They're already top 10 in the net, top 10 in KenPom. I think they're pretty safe at this point, but this would have been the worst potential loss they could have taken, and they avoided it with a comfortable win in Pullman. Utah State crushed San Jose State, not even worth 105-57. This was a game where Utah State didn't need, they just needed to not lose. But from a metrics perspective, it sure helps to absolutely blast the doors off somebody like San Jose State. And that's what they did. And they got one game closer to potentially winning the Mountain West Conference because New Mexico went on the road to Boise and lost 86-78, the final there. New Mexico is going to be fine. You know, this hurts them from a seeding perspective, but they're still going to be in the field, even if they don't win the Mountain West Conference championship. I don't think this puts them on the bubble, but it's a huge win for Boise State, who was on the bubble and is now probably in a more comfortable spot, potentially in that 8-9 conversation, or at least in a last four in conversation for the Broncos. This is a big time win for Boise State. They already beat Clemson non-conference. They beat St. Mary's non-conference. They've now beat Nevada and New Mexico. They swept UNLV. This is a good Boise State team that deserves to be in this conversation, and I think pushed themselves off the bubble and safely inside the field of 68 with this win against New Mexico on Wednesday night. Well, looking ahead to Thursday, only one ranked team is in action, but there's still plenty of excitement. We got a good couple Big Ten matchups. We got some bubble matchups to talk about as well. All that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we are now looking ahead to Thursday night slate. Thursdays, typically slow days in college basketball. We've talked about that. It's kind of mid-major Thursdays. A lot of the non-power conferences have their conference games on Thursday, Saturday schedules, so we end up seeing a lot more games from conferences that aren't in the power conference conversation. But we do have 2 power conference games taking place on Thursday, both of them in the Big Ten. The Big Ten, as I've been saying, the gift that keeps on giving. They have games basically every day this entire college basketball season with an 18-game conference or an 18-team conference. They opted to do what I wish other conferences did, which is spread out their games and have it be so that you kind of have contests every single day. I think it's a good way for them to stay in the relevant conversation. So we'll talk about those 2 Big Ten games. We'll talk about 4 bubble games going on late tonight, Thursday night as well. First up, the only ranked team in action is Maryland. The Terps hosting USC, 8:30 Eastern time on FS1. FanDuel favoring the Terps in that one by 10.5 points. They've won 3 straight now. Maryland they're now 10-5 in the Big Ten. They're 20-6 overall. Big shout out to them for getting to the 20 win mark. USC, meanwhile, 6-8. They need a really strong finish to conference play in order to get into the bubble conversation. They're not in it right now. They shouldn't be in it right now. You beat a team like Maryland at home. You go out on the road, and you beat Maryland. That starts to get that conversation going. USC's picked up some big wins this year already. They have done it, but they're not in that conversation right now. Meanwhile, Maryland, comfortable with where they're at right now, having a good season. This should be a game dictated primarily by Maryland's front court. Derek Queen and Julian Reese have been fantastic all season long. USC does not have front court depth. They have a really tall starting lineup because all their guards are like 6'6", 6'7", but Josh Cohen does not play like a traditional big. He would struggle against somebody like Derek Queen. I think Maryland's front court is too dynamic and too big and strong and physical, and I think it's going to overwhelm USC, and I think that's going to be the difference in this one. Your other Big Ten matchup, Northwestern going on the road to Columbus to take on Ohio State, 6:30 Eastern time on FS1. So this game will be before the USC-Maryland game. FanDuel favoring Ohio State in that one by 10.5. The Buckeyes 7-8 in the Big Ten. This win, if they were to pick it up, would get them up to 500 in conference play. Meanwhile, Northwestern down to 4-11. Brooks Barnhizer versus Bruce Thornton, going to be a fun guard matchup going on in that Big Ten battle. Looking over to the bubble games, we got 2 Big West games and 2 WCC games to talk about to close out the show. The Big West battles UC San Diego on the road to San Luis Obispo to take on the Mustangs of Cal Poly. 10 Eastern time on ESPN+. FanDuel favoring UC San Diego by 14.5 in that one. The other game, CSUN, Cal State Northridge at UC Irvine, 10 Eastern time as well on ESPN+. FanDuel favoring Irvine, the Anteaters, by 6.5. I bring both these games up because UC San Diego, who's at Cal Poly, and UC Irvine, who's hosting CSUN, they're both 12-2 in the Big West right now. And reasonably, and this is not a conversation we expected to have, it's not a conversation we typically have, the Big West could be a 2-bid league. It has for a long time been a 1-bid league. But both these teams have resumes that stand alone as potential at-large consideration for the NCAA tournament. but those resumes are precarious. One of these teams is going to make it, assuming they win the Big West regular season. One of these teams is going in. But if you lose a game like this, your tiny chance of being an at-large mid-major from a conference like the Big West, gone. It's gone. CSUN is the better team. They're 10-4, but UC Irvine is hosting them at their house. UC San Diego going to Cal Poly. Cal Poly is only 4-10, but they are a team with a new coach, with a very new system. They played very well this non-conference against San Francisco and Stanford. Cal Poly is a little bit of a dangerous team, especially at home. If UC San Diego struggles or does not win that game at Cal Poly, I think their at-large hopes are gone. If UC Irvine does not hold home court and beat CSUN, I think their at-large hopes are gone. Both those teams, of course, could still make it if they were to win the Big West Tournament championship. But as of right now, I think their odds of staying even on the periphery of the bubble conversation are predicated on them not losing a single other game the rest of the season, including either of these games starting at 10 Eastern time on ESPN+. Speaking of 10 Eastern time starts on ESPN+, Pacific going on the road to take on the Dons of San Francisco. This game, FanDuel favors the Dons by 15.5. This is similar to other games we talked about. You just can't lose it. You just can't lose it. From a metrics perspective, sure, if you're Chris Gerlofson in San Francisco, beat Pacific by 50. Put yourself in a comfortable position to move up in the net, move up in the KenPom, move up in Torvik, but ultimately you just cannot lose this basketball game. San Francisco's 11-4 in the WCC. They're 21-7 overall. They have a very competitive non-conference schedule, picked up some nice wins, beat St. Mary's, the only team in the conference to do that at this point. If USF wins out, they could be an at-large team. They're outside the bubble conversation right now, and winning out would require them to beat Gonzaga. If USF beats Gonzaga, they'll have a win over Gonzaga, a win over San Francisco. Their losses are pretty much all good losses for the most part. I think this Dons team would start to get real consideration at that point. You lose to Pacific at home, you're done. So this is a must-win game for San Francisco to keep their small bubble hopes alive. That's been the theme of this entire bubble segment. And guess what? It's the theme of the final team also in the WCC. LMU going on the road to take on Santa Clara, the Broncos. This game at 11 Eastern time. It'll be on ESPN2. FanDuel favoring the Broncos by 12.5. I think Santa Clara's at-large hopes might already be over. I think there's a slim glimmer of hope for the Broncos. They're 9-5 in the WCC. They're only 17-10 overall. Sub-20 win team. I mean, they'll probably get to 20 wins, but they're going to be barely at 20 wins. They had a really rough start to the season. But if they win out, again, they also play Gonzaga. If they beat Gonzaga, certainly if they got to win this LMU game, they beat Gonzaga, they beat somebody in the WCC tournament, be in that championship game, then you maybe get in that large bid. Maybe. But again, LMU's lost 6 of their last 7. You lose to LMU in this game, it's over. It's done. You got to win the WCC tournament. Nobody's won that WCC tournament, not named Gonzaga or St. Mary's, in a really long time. So this is for San Francisco and Santa Clara, their hopes right now are pretty small. They don't have a great chance of getting in that large bid, but it is slim. And if you lose either of these games, that slim chance is gone unless you win the WCC tournament. Lots of fun stuff to take in on Thursday. We'll be back on Friday morning, myself and Isaac Shade, my co-host, to recap all the action on Thursday and get you ready for an incredible slate of games this weekend. Tons of great conference games. We also got a fantastic non-conference matchup coming our way between Illinois and Duke. Cannot wait for that game taking place this weekend. We'll be there to get you all the previews for it, and then Leaf Tulane will be there with you on Saturday night to recap all of the action as it gets wrapped up late on Saturday night. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the McBruins. And until Friday, peace.